Welcome, everybody. We're going to give a few minutes to let everybody get on. We had quite a big response to this webinar. So we'll give a few minutes to let people sign on. Welcome, everybody. If you're just joining, we are about to get started in just another minute or two. This will be an hour-long webinar, and it will be recorded. It's also being live streamed on Facebook, both by Telos and the American Friends of the Parent Circle. So we're just giving people a minute to sign on, and then we'll get started. So welcome, everyone. My name is Shiri Orion. I'm the Executive Director of the American Friends of the Parent Circle. I'm joined here by my wonderful colleagues and friends and partners. And today's a very special day. Today is International Peace Day, September 21st. It's an official UN holiday. And this year, we are lucky to be marking the day in Montgomery, Alabama. So we are not speaking to you from Israel or Palestine, where we usually are, but in Montgomery, Alabama, which we just ended an incredible 7-day tour of the US South. We started in New Orleans and moved to Jackson, Mississippi. We were in Selma, and then we took the journey from Selma to Montgomery, just like many of the great civil rights heroes did many years ago. And today in Montgomery, we are here to talk to you about why did we do this trip? Why did we bring Israelis and Palestinians and Americans together to take a tour of the US South? Why are we looking at slavery? And why are we looking at the civil rights movement and issues of racial inequities today? What does that have to do with Israel-Palestine? And that's really what we were sort of experimenting with, right? Like, we know that there are commonalities. We know that no two conflicts are the same. We are by no means saying that Israel and Palestine is the same conflict as we have faced or are facing here, but there are many things that are similar. And so that's what we're going to explore today. I will introduce everybody that's with us. First, I want to turn it over to my partner from Telos, Todd Dethridge. Todd, can you talk to us a little bit about, first of all, tell us why you guys are doing this trip, and sort of the bird's eye view of the journey that we've just taken.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. It's been a real treat to be with all of you this week. Telos is a nonprofit based in the US, and our work has largely been in helping Americans understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and our role in it, and help them support the work of conflict resolution and reconciliation there. And so the Parent Circle have long been our key friend and partner in so many ways in that work. But after taking a lot of Americans there through the years, we began to also have them come back asking about, how do I actually take these same principles and things I'm learning and apply them in other situations, especially here at home, and particularly around issues of racial injustice in America. And so we created a trip program a few years ago that is an attempt to tell a more honest and complete version of our own American story. And we believe that telling an honest and complete and true story is very important in the work of conflict resolution and reconciliation, that you have to deal with the world as it is, not as you want it to be, deal with different perspectives and narratives, but deal with the true reality, especially from the people who are on the margins and whose stories are not often told. Those have to be brought into the mainstream. So that's what we've been doing the last week. We started in New Orleans. We made our way through Jackson, Mississippi and Selma, and we ended up in Montgomery, Alabama. Again, just trying to tell a more complete American story.
And I love what you say about telling a more honest story, because that really holds true for the narratives that we're trying to hold here and the narratives that we're trying to hold in Israel and Palestine. It's not easy to tell a more honest story. So thank you for pushing us to do that. I'm going to turn it over to Robbie Damlin. Robbie is a bereaved Israeli mother. She is the spokesperson for the Parent Circle. And Robbie, you've already been on this trip. This is your second time on this trip. And so you recognize something when you took this trip for the first time with Telos and Todd. You recognized something that was important for the Parent Circle and that would speak to the Parent Circle and would sort of inform how we think about Israel and Palestine. What was it that you recognized?
Well, I think in many ways, everybody in Israel and Palestine thinks that it's impossible that we should ever end the conflict. But I just wanted to say that spending a week ending in International Peace Day and thinking about the joy that we had, say, dancing African music, and of course my South African background has a lot to play here, dancing with such joy in Congo Square, and then going to the plantation, to the Whitney plantation, and experiencing this grateful period of such violence and such hatred and such license to kill, you know. And then this is what this trip is all about. It's this, from recognizing that people can actually, even to this day, want to reach out and want to be in a place where they can feel equal. You know, this morning we went to the museum, and for me, that's the most painful part of this trip. It's the Equal Justice Museum. Just walking into the museum and seeing these thousands and thousands, 2 million Black people were killed on the way to the United States. Do the people here really know the story? I keep saying if I was the King of America, I would certainly send every single person on this trip. I think it should be compulsory for every school to understand their history. And you can find the parallel in what we are doing in the Parent Circle, in the Parallel Narrative Project, for instance, this looking at history through the eyes of both sides and understanding the pain of the other and listening with empathy, even if you don't agree. So I would urge everybody that's on this webinar to consider taking a trip like this. We were in a group of people who all thought they knew about the civil rights movement. They'd seen movies, they'd read books, but they'd never really experienced being here, feeling the poverty in Selma, and just seeing how desperate that all is and how much is needed in Jackson. But then going into a church and listening to this wonderful music, you know, with joyous. So there are two sides of life, and we have to keep looking at both of those sides and telling the truth about what happened. That's what we have to do. So if Lila and I'm so pleased that Lila is my partner here, so she too can experience what I did. I mean, I remember I was so full of this trip. On the first time, I quickly phoned Shiri and said, we have to do this, you know, so that others can experience. Please consider doing this.
And Robbie, I wish you were King of America. And I think we have a little clip of you from Congo Square. Can we share it? Bear with us for a minute. That's where we started the trip. Here you'll see Robbie in her element. The sound, give us a second. The sound is pretty good.
So there's the African blood.
Yeah.
She's still got moves.
Thank you, Robbie. I want to move on to Yuval. And by the way, everybody, we're going to take questions and answers. So if you have a question, feel free to write it in the Q&A box, and we'll get to it. You can do that as we're speaking. Yuval, you had a strong, we met with Rena Evers, Medgar Evers' daughter. For those of you who don't know, maybe joining us from abroad, Medgar Evers was a major civil rights activist. He was the head of the NAACP, and he was shot outside of his home. And his daughter, Rena Evers, is carrying on much of his legacy. We met with her, and she shared her story with us. Here she is, holding a book of her father. And Yuval, you went and spoke to Rena afterwards. You had a strong reaction to her story. Can you tell us a little bit about what you reacted to and why?
Well, she was, first, she's an extraordinary person. In her presentation and how she took this event and carried on with the legacy. But I'll approach her from a completely different point of view, because we are all, bereaved families, and everybody lost somebody. It's completely different circumstances, but yet we do something with that loss. We try to make a change, but we were kids at the time. We were not freedom fighters. We were not human rights activists. We were just kids. And I really asked her, what was it like? At the same age as I lost my father, 8 years old. She lost her father. He was assassinated. My father was killed in the war. And we had to grow up without this pillar in our lives. And whereas the death with our fathers was really something that was much bigger than us, much bigger than, because it was for a cause, for the protection of our people. We as kids, we were left in some way, we were left outside, we were left on the side, because everything was mobilized at the time. In my time, it was, the war and the defense of Israel, and my father was a hero, of course, and everybody was praising that. But as a child, what can you do with that, really, with all the void that was now in your life? And this is how I approached Rena, and we didn't have enough time, but of course we will try to catch up, because those feelings of everybody who lost somebody is sometimes left aside because we are really dealing with the cause, but the pain is constantly there. Everybody who lost somebody, and we met people who lost somebody 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and they still carry the pain and the loss. And the incredible thing is nobody is thinking of revenge. Everybody is thinking of what can we do with that loss to prevent more injustice, more loss, more bereaved people, more bereaved children who are forced to grow up without their parents, and parents who are forced to lose their children because of injustice and poverty and conflicts and wars. It's the same all over. We have a completely different conflict back there. The background is completely different, the cause, but the shape that it takes is the same, because at the end there are people that pay the price. The ordinary people, women, children, adults, young, and no matter what race they are, their pain is the same. And we must tell a story that will allow people to reach out to each side, not to be just take one side and think this is the right side and the other is wrong. There's no such conflict really. And if you are hearing us here from the United States and you wonder what can you do with the conflict in the Middle East, which is really between Israel and Palestine, and you wonder who's the right one, who's the wrong, and what side to take, just think of taking the side of peace, forcing our leaders, we have leaders that refuse to discuss, forcing them to discuss is the best thing that we can do to the future of our children.
Thanks, Yuval. And I didn't introduce you properly, but Yuval Rachamim is the Israeli co-director of the Parent Circle, and he lost his father. He's been a member for many years. So thank you for that, Yuval. Lila, I want to turn to you. Lila, this was your first trip to the US. So it's quite a welcome that you received and quite an entree to the US, probably not the way that most people see the US for the first time. And I wanted to ask you about, we went to the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, and you also had a powerful reaction there. We met with a man named Hezekiah Watson, thank you. And he was the youngest freedom rider. And he spoke to us, he shared his story, and we were sitting in this sort of great room, which was like the center of the Civil Rights Museum, and it had pictures, photos of all of the great civil rights activists that have been lost, and their names and their memories, and the core quotes that they had given, words that they had spoken. It was a really powerful space, and it was a really powerful story that he shared. So what made you emotional through that, Lila? What resonated for you? There you are, talking to him. That's the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson. Everybody should go.
First of all, to be in the state, even with this great group, and to visit all these places and to know all those people that I was read about before and see many movies about, but that was so powerful, and at the same time, it's so painful. Because to read about something and to see movies, but it's totally different to be in the same situation and to hear the story from the own people who were really suffered from that. And when he started to talk about his story and how many times he was jailed, and he didn't lose hope, and he continued, and he was early age, and that was amazing. At that early age, maybe a lot of children will be scared, and they, after maybe 1 or 2 times, they will be scared and they will never continue, but he continued. And his story was so painful and powerful at the same time, how much he was accused, but he continued because he believed in something. And this is what we are doing in the Parent Circle. Yeah, we are, all of us, bereaved families, but even though from that pain, we continue and we took that hope to continue and to do something much more useful for the next generation, for our children and grandchildren and all the generation who came after us. And his story reminds me of myself, but I know that it's not the same, same maybe circumstances, but the pain is the pain and suffer is the same suffer. And that was an amazing opportunity for me to meet him and to meet others. And even inside the museum, I read other kind of stories, other kind of photos that I saw. And that would even give me a chance to rethink what we should do in the Parent Circle and what we should do on the ground.
And you know, it was so extraordinary to watch Lila, because one of the people spoke about tear gas, and Lila lost her baby through tear gas thrown by Israeli soldiers. And there was such an empathy between these two people, recognizing the shared pain, which is what we talk about at the time.
Yeah, when she mentioned the tear gas, immediately I saw what happened to my son just in 1 second. It's like to see a movie in 1 second, and that was so emotional for me. And then she asked me to came and hug me, and sometimes even small things, it's so powerful. Like when she hugged me, that made me feel much more secure and loved. And there's someone who could really understand the pain that even if we didn't spoke a word about, just to have that emotional feelings, it's make us so human. And I always ask myself, why as a human we do these things against each other? We should live in this land to love each other, not to be killed each other or have that hatred and anger against each other. So this is a powerful, really journey. And I wish if we can bring other people from Palestine and Israel to this kind of trips.
Yeah, I wish that too. This was a remarkable opportunity. For those of you that don't know, Lila lost her son, Kusai, when he was 6 months old, as a result of inhalation of tear gas and not being allowed to get proper medical attention. So it's amazing to hear that there was some healing in all of this for you, some repair for you all in all of this. Ainka, hi, I haven't forgotten about you. Ainka is our partner and in Selma. She's the executive director of the Selma Center for Nonviolence. And we had the privilege of spending a good portion of yesterday with Ainka and her colleagues. Here we go, in the Selma Center. This is Ainka talking very passionately about the principles of nonviolence, the principles of nonviolence. And this is some of the activities that we did, learning about what real nonviolence looks like, and how nonviolence is not just the opposite of violence. Ainka, you went to Israel and Palestine. You've been there. You got to see the conflict up close. And obviously you are familiar with our conflicts here and the work that you're doing. So bring it back home to the US for us. So how did the work, or how did the conflict that you in Israel and Palestine change you? You said it changed you personally in a profound way. And then how did it change the work that you're doing here in the US?
Yeah, so the experience literally changed my life, and I don't say that lightly. It changed my life personally and professionally. There were a lot of things that similarities I saw and struggle, but really, what changed my life is because I saw the role of fear and conflict. And I saw it in myself, right? And I was removed from enough distractions to hear my own judgmental thoughts, and recognize the work that I needed to do on myself to be a peacemaker. I wrote a blog called Let There Be Peace about my experience. And I'll share just one little piece, because I think sometimes it can be helpful. We sort of separate ourselves from other people because we're like, those are those kind of people, because we don't immediately go to, for example, one person shared when I was there that fear creates hatred and hatred creates violence, right? And so we won't think of ourselves as a person who is violent or who is a person who hates, right? But fear can take us there. And so some of these things I saw in myself when we were at one of the place where Jesus was, they say Jesus was resurrected. And when I learned that the different denominations could not get along enough to do upkeep, that they had divided even columns, who was responsible for the top half and the lower half, I was extremely overwhelmed with a sense of grief and anger. And so I'll just read this little piece. It says, I went over to the Holy Land, which at times felt more like a hated land, believing what Jesus says in John 14:12, very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. So to see people who profess to believe in resurrection power and the same Holy Spirit not being able to work through the upkeep of the building deeply saddened me. That sadness turned to judgment and then to fear. Fear that if they can't get it right, then how can we in Selma? including most of our leaders who profess the same things, get it right. That fear turned into anger, and that anger turned into self-righteousness, which blinds you and is different from the righteous anger that God feels. But then I was convicted. And Selma has so much violence. In 2014, we were the poorest county in the state. 2015, we were the most dangerous place to live in Alabama. In 2016, we were the 8th most dangerous place per capita in the whole country. And so I'm carrying this with me, looking for something. And so I was deeply outraged and saddened to know that, like, even in this holy place, that even people within the same faith couldn't do it. And so by the end of the journey, I learned a lot of things that I won't go into right now, but I learned that we are often so self-righteous that we are blinded and we are part of the problem. In closing, one person said, peacemakers make invisible violence visible. They disrupt systemic violence without replicating it. And I said, when I've been unhumble, judgmental, fearful, and self-righteous, I have replicated violence, and I have not been a peacemaker. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. And so it really started me on a journey of really doing the work, which is the first principle of racial equity, doing your work so other people won't have to work more. So it was an amazing experience that has since changed all of the work I do, how we teach nonviolence, racial equity, just everything, because we can't have world peace if I don't have peace, if you don't have peace, if you don't have peace.
Yeah, I think that's something that all of the participants on the trip came away with, that, we all have to start with ourselves. And I'm wondering if all of you would take a minute and share with us briefly about how this has changed you and the work that you're doing moving forward in Israel and Palestine, or here in the US. Robbie, we'll start with you.
Well, I don't know if it changed me. I think what it is it made me more aware, of understanding other places that went through these dreadful times, and also of going back to my own South African roots and understanding how there still are places in America suffering from apartheid. The places that we went to, Montgomery, just where we're sitting, Jackson. This is very scary, Selma, that in a place like this can still exist. And yet also meeting women, I think it's very important that women be mainly peacemakers. And just meeting Black women that I felt this tremendous affinity, from my past, and also because they laugh. And I think laughter is the bridge to the heart.
Todd?
I mean, I think that the work we've been doing in Israel and Palestine, and now in the US, the threads you see that come together are just the transformative power of people who are living with bearing the greatest weight of whether it's conflict or injustice, and the work that they are doing out of that space, and how deeply wise and true it is, and how when you meet, with members of the parent circle, like those that were with us here, when you meet with people like Ainka and Rena Everett, who's been mentioned already, and some of these Black women we've met with, and you see the weight of their reality, and yet you see what they're doing to change that reality and how powerful and true it is, you get hope that these things can change. We can feel very trapped in these situations, but you actually can see a way out, and you can see that this is a way out, that there's truth in this. And so whatever the context is, these are the people that show us how. And so those are some of the common things that we see in the work we've been doing in both places. And then to add to what Robbie said, to particularly see the role that women play.
Mhm.
I mean, the stars of this trip in the American South are women, and they're mostly Black women who are really making important change in their own community and doing things that are so profoundly true and important.
Yeah, I mean, we saw in one of the museums we went to the role of the granny midwife in plantation life and slavery life, and what a untold story that is, and also in terms of women's role in peacemaking and nonviolence and conflict resolution. I'm going to turn to the rest of you too to answer, but I want to make sure that everybody knows that if you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A box, because soon we'll get to the questions. But before we do, I want to hear from Yuval and Lila about how this trip has informed the work that you're doing on the ground in Israel and Palestine.
Well, I think it's apart from us, which made a long way to come here, and we're not completely aware of that, of what took place here. I mean, for us, most of the information was completely new, but for the rest of the group who are American, more liberal, progressive, they have access to knowledge, and I'm not criticizing, but most of them were moved to where they understand sometimes for the first time how deep was that suffering in the South, and how deep it is right now. So what I take from this is the power of knowledge and of experience things from witnessing, because we should not assume that the fact that we know what is taking place, what's going on, or what was in the past, we should not assume that everybody is aware, because today information is so abundant. So people do not always go and search for that. They go for other stuff that is much lighter. And our purpose is to really bring the truth to people in any possible channel. What we experience here is that the information came from so many layers. Information, not just things that you can read, but hearing people, seeing things that touch you both on the mind and on your soul with such powerful, it makes such a powerful change. So we should bring back to our work the importance of getting people to experience and to know and to learn what's taking place in the past. Yes, people are trying to avoid looking at the past, and right now.
And we saw that in the Legacy Museum today, and in the Equal Justice Memorial, that it talked about confronting the past or recognizing the past so we can move on towards the future. And I think that's an important part of the reconciliation work that Parent Circle is trying to do, and that both of those institutes are trying to do as well. Also must visit in Montgomery, Alabama. Lila, tell us about you. How has this changed you? What will you do differently? What will you take back to Palestine?
In fact, it didn't change me, but it's given me much more power and much more faith to continue what we are doing. And maybe I get much more information and much more stories to tell my children about, to teach them about slavery and about the conflict even in Palestine and Israel, and how the difference between them and what's the common things between them. And I think maybe I will think about what of the things that we could do after that, like to continue. It's not like just finish this trip, go back home and like forget what happened. No, we want to continue this. We want to think about what should we do next, what's the next step, and what's the thing that we should do for our conflict.
Yeah.
Because if those people that after all these years, after all this suffering, they came to this point. So we will have one day peace, inshallah, and reconciliation. And maybe we'll have our own museum to tell the same story.
life.
Yeah,
But don't you think, I think that listening to the personal stories of the people we met along the line is so important, because that's what makes it real, and that's what makes us real, is when we tell the stories of loss.
Right.
That's the emotional breakthrough that we got through the people that were really out there telling us who they were.
Yeah. Anka, we talked a little bit about reconciliation at the end. You said, obviously the goal and the mission of the Parent Circle is to create a reconciliation process or a framework between people to people on the ground, between Israelis and Palestinians. And part of the work that you do also includes reconciliation. I know you wanted to touch upon that a little bit.
Yes. So for many, reconciliation is like a touchy-feely thing, right? That we all just get along. And in nonviolence, we strongly push back against that, right? That reconciliation requires justice, right? That it requires that there be change, right? And I'll read you our definition of the nonviolence, Kingian nonviolence definition. We say that it's the mandatory closing step of any nonviolent campaign when the opponents and the proponents celebrate the victory and provide joint leadership to implement change. Now, I will say that that's very difficult, right? It means that every other step, including, how you tell the truth, why you tell the truth, everything else, your goal is reconciliation, right? Dr. King talks about unarmed truth, right? Because we can tell the truth sometimes, and we can tell that we can do it to try to kill someone's spirit, versus trying to do it in a way that our goal is reconciliation, right? So I will say that I believe that with reconciliation, it does require forgiveness, right? That it's hard to celebrate with someone when you don't forgive them, but it does not require exoneration. There's still accountability, right? I strongly believe that we have love is what's required. I believe love is the opposite of fear, right? And love is what required, but I think we so often feel have a wrong, and not that I know it all either, but that we have a wrong feeling of love. And let me just read this quote from Dr. King, because I think it will ground us in sort of what's possible when we root love, ground in love, and that will help us to get it to reconciliation. You can't really get to reconciliation without love. He says, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. And so to me, reconciliation is really that balance of power and love working to make sure that justice is coming about for all involved.
Thank you for that, Anka. A Parent Circle, all of our members are in a different place in their journey in reconciliation, and forgiveness is not a prerequisite for being a member at the Parent Circle. And we recognize that, it's a spectrum, and some people might be in a place of building trust and relationships and empathy and just learning more about the other side, and they might never get to forgiveness, but it's all part of the process.
It also should be said that it should be said that most Palestinians have no idea who killed their child, and so there isn't that face
Right.
for reconciliation or forgiveness. But I think that when Lila talks about forgiving coming from herself, to forgive herself is the way that she can move on.
I didn't wait them to say sorry for me, and I know that no one day they will come to say sorry for doing what they done to me. But I do this because I need that to feel free, to feel peace inside my heart, because I can't be a peace activist and speak about peace and reconciliation, and I didn't feel that in my heart. And this is why I do it. And forgiveness for me not to forget what happened to my son, not to forget what's going on, but to put the hatred and the anger away. This is the definition for forgiveness.
And that would be mine as well,
Yeah.
right? I've heard it talked about before is you remember the lesson, but you release the pain, right? So it's not that you forget, right? You don't forget, but I'm not going to carry that, and not that you don't have pain for your loss. And so that's not even the pain, but that hatred, that bitterness, right? That's what you're releasing, right? And so you never let go of the wisdom and the lesson from it, because that would be foolish, right? You need that wisdom as you move forward, but you do it for yourself, as she said, right? I heard someone say, and I'll stop after this, that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's really for yourself, so that you can move forward, so that I can move forward. It's not about the other person. They may never say it. It's for myself.
I will tell you why, because before I think, or even before I become a member in the Barron Circle, I stayed for 16 years. I didn't have any chance to talk to any Israelis or even to speak about what happened to my son. And that was caused a health problem for me. And this is right what you said, that it's like drinking poison and think that the other person, he will die.
So I want to turn to some of the questions that have come in. There are a number of questions that have come in, and feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We're still taking questions. Nancy is asking about, she says, it's important that telling an honest and complete story is an important consideration in designing K through 12 pedagogy, so elementary or education in the US, if we want a different future. How do we navigate education in conflicting communities? How can we envision that kind of learning? And if someone wants to answer that in the US, maybe Ainka or Todd, but I think it's also, maybe Yuval, you can respond to what's happening in the education system in Israel as well.
So I'll quickly say that I'm from Selma, Alabama, and I live here. And Selma's history wasn't taught about in Selma. We took Alabama history in 4th and 9th grade, same purple book. And in 9th grade, my teacher told me it talks about Selma on page such and such and such, but we've run out of time. You can read about Dr. King if you want to. That was the extent. Not world history, not US history, but Selma history and Alabama history was not taught. And I don't think that that is by accident. And it's worse now, right? Because of the attack on critical race theory, when critical race theory is not taught in schools anyway. I didn't learn about critical race theory until I was in law school, right? So this we are in an even harder environment, particularly in the South now with this. But what I will say is that even if it can't happen in schools, the community has to take it upon themselves as we continue to fight battles to teach it in schools, right? That we teach it at home, we teach it in communities, we make movies about it, we do books. We started a children's book series called Selma Superheroes. So people in Selma, children in Selma would know that nobody came to save them, right? That people in Selma worked for decades to help get voting rights, and then others came in to help and highlighted and built upon what they were doing, so that they won't keep waiting for someone to save them to stop the violence or stop poverty and stop all the other issues, right? But that they have the power to transform their own community. And so until things change, until we help things to change in the schools, I think it's so important that we find other alternatives to make sure that our young people know the full history, including attending amazing museums like EJI.
Yeah, well, in Israel and Palestine, we still have a very active and violent conflict. So both education systems are mobilized to strengthen the national narrative and to produce children and adults who are really immersed in the narrative of one side. And that's really counterproductive if we want to really create peace. And I hope that one day we will have all those museums and that's to celebrate the peace and to learn about the past. But for now, neither the past, neither the present is educated in a way that encourages dialogue and peace. And what we are doing, we're trying to do it as an NGO, as a nonprofit within the systems that exist, as much as we are allowed. So we are allowed as an organization to go into schools where we are invited and to tell the story of the bereaved families and how they are, as people who have the most just cause to revenge or to hate, how we have crossed that and transformed into peace activists on both sides, and we work together. And we demonstrate that by coming together, Palestinians and Israelis, to the class and speak about our personal and national and transformation. And that is really hard because in many places in Israel where we do that, people find that offensive and try to prevent us from doing that, either for political reasons or other reasons. So, but luckily enough, we are still allowed to do that, and there are many places that still invite us to do it. In Palestine as well, we are doing it very cautiously because, again, the sentiment on the street is that there is a conflict, and you should not negotiate with parents or bereaved families from the other side while the conflict is still running. So we do that really cautiously, and we get to meet people on both sides. And once we do manage to meet and tell our stories, that this is changing really perspectives for people who listen to that. So all we need to do is to gather and have the people listening to that story. And immediately that creates a completely different environment and openness to move forward to a different kind of solution, that this conflict can end eventually and that we can live with the other side.
Yeah, and just this week while we were traveling here in the US, there was an incident in Israel where a school did not want us to attend. And so it really hit home.
Well, the school wanted us to attend, but it suffered so much pressure from the community that was fed with so much false information about what we are planning to do there. So they decided to give it up and maybe do it in the latest time. But yes, people want to listen to us, but they are subject to a lot of political pressure.
Yeah.
Well, but 90% of the kids that we meet in Israeli schools have actually never met a Palestinian or heard their story before. So until they suddenly are exposed to a story like Lila, or a story that comes from Muhammad or one of the other Palestinians in our group, if you will ask them, who you've ever met a Palestinian, and I'm talking about a class of about 30 kids, it'll probably be no one. And who's been overseas? Most of the class. And who speaks Arabic? No one. So there's this total cutoff. And so for the first time in their lives, they suddenly are exposed to the narrative of the other. And everything that we do really in the parent circle is about telling the story. And so that makes the emotional breakthrough. Just last week, we needed permission for a Palestinian woman to come to an event that we had. And our office phoned up the army to get permission. And the guy who answered the phone said, "I'll do anything for you. You were in my classroom last year." So this is the one heart at a time.
Right.
It's terribly important. It's so important to hear a story that doesn't come off the television or off your newspaper.
So this next question, Todd, I want to give to you. Your trips that you guys, I mean, we experienced it today in Israel and Palestine, are phenomenal. They're planned so thoughtfully. The experience is so powerful. And Lynn wants to know what your hope is for the impact of this program on your audience and the outcome.
For our work here in the US, we call this program ambitiously Restory US or Restory Us. And the big grand hope is that we help to be a part of creating a community of people who are willing and ready to really tell a more honest American story. As a predicate, again, to doing the work that we need to do, to really do the work to make our own communities and our own country more just for all. And so that's a big goal. But I think what we're hoping is that we unleash the power of Americans who want to really do the work, to reach across lines, to listen to the stories that haven't been widely told. There's a great TED talk by Chimamanda Adichie who about the danger of a single story. And too often we live inside a single story. And so we have to get outside that story and listen to the stories from the people on the margins whose stories are not often known or told, and then fold that in to really create a more honest version of our own story. And in America, it's really important for us because we aspire to have a common story. And in fact, America at its best, at its aspirational best, is a set of ideals that anybody theoretically can buy into and be part of. But that requires us to have a common story but the challenge is that the story that we've commonly told has not been true, or it's not been complete. And so there's enormous work to be done out there, but this is a moment to do it in too. There's some real desire, especially amongst younger Americans, to really understand to who we are as a people, what we aspire to be, and what we've often been in practice, and how we bring into greater coherence those two things together. America is aspirational best, and then the way we live those values and truths out.
And if you haven't taken a Telos trip, I highly recommend that you do. Let's see, we have a few more minutes left. Someone's asking, Elizabeth says she loves the suggestion that all Americans visit the EJI Museum for real education about our country's shameful history. Could you please tell us about the Parallel Narratives Project? Is this happening in Israel and Palestine? And the answer to that is yes. It's a parent circle project. It's been running for more than 10 years, and over 1,500 people have participated in this program. It takes a group of Israelis and Palestinians together, usually of a shared background, whether they're all teachers or they're all journalists, or right now we're running one for parents of teenagers. And they go through a series of workshops and lectures. They do site visits at Yad Vashem and a previous Palestinian village, and they look at the national, personal, and historical narratives of the other. And this is what I was talking about before in terms of the process of reconciliation. All of that is on this spectrum, right? When we can understand better, when we have more knowledge of the other side, then we are furthering ourselves on the journey of reconciliation. And on all of our P&Es, as we call them, have had really positive results in terms of the impact that it has on the participants. Again, it's like Robbie always says, it's like taking water out of the ocean with a teaspoon. It's slow and it's grueling, but the work is deep. So that's a little bit about our P&E project, and Christopher can put some more information in the chat. And while I'm looking at the rest of the questions,
I did want to say one thing that, we spoke about Israeli schools, but that isn't to say that we don't work in the West Bank, not necessarily in schools, but in homes and meeting with students. And I can tell you it's the same situation. If you go to an average Palestinian house and there are, say, 40 women sitting there, the only Israelis that they've ever met in their lives are in uniform or are settlers. So why would they think there's anything different out there? And that's why that story, that human story and understanding the shared pain is what's so important about the narrative of the other, about the dialogue meetings.
So I think that's almost all the time we have left. Why don't we end with a little slideshow, a little video of our trip. What, Robbie, the worst has already been shown of you dancing.
The best.
So here we are right in front of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We were fortunate to have a rabbi with us, and she said a prayer for all the courageous people that had walked across the bridge, and then we walked across in silence. Here's Lila on the bridge. This is Medgar Evers' house. It's now part of the
National Park Service.
National Park Service. And it is being preserved. This is where he was shot in the driveway of his home. And this is his daughter, Rena, clutching a book about her father, where she met Yuval, or Yuval met her. And this was at the Whitney plantation, right outside of New Orleans, the big white house, as they called it, where the slave owners lived. And they talked about the difference between the big white house and then sort of the gray house where the overseers lived. And the overseers were the ones that, were responsible for inflicting a lot of the violence and brutality. And actually, Yuval wrote a piece about that that we can also put in the chat. Christopher, are there any more videos that we wanted to show? This is at the Whitney plantation. This is Yvonne Holden. She's the new, you see her here in the mask. She's the former, what was her title?
Director of Operations.
She was Director of Operations at Whitney, and Telos is now very fortunate to have her be the Director of the US programs, and she is just a fantastic, so she's full of knowledge. There's the gray house of the overseers. Yes, somebody wrote that there were American Jews who walked across the bridge.
Let me, I can pull up more photos here in a sec.
Just so you guys know, people are saying, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. Many inspiring words. There were American Jews who walked across that bridge in solidarity with the African-American activists fighting for civil rights. Everyone is deeply thankful for all of you. So I think we can end there, unless Christopher, you found a video that you desperately want to show us.
I didn't take a whole lot of videos.
Okay.
It was mostly photos.
The Whitney slave quarters. Someone is asking for a photo of the Whitney slave quarters.
Oh boy. Let me see if I can find that.
There should be one there.
Yeah.
We did see them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I do have a photo of that, but oh yeah, here we go. 1 second, sorry. I have like all these photos organized in different folders from different days, but there was just so much that we did and saw.
These are the slave quarters.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can't see it now because someone is blocking, but Yvonne is sitting on the porch, and right next to her on the porch, there's a statue of a little enslaved boy, which was just.
Because sharecropping and other things replaced actual enslavement after the Civil War, there were African Americans who lived in those cabins until 1975, continuing to work on the plantation in a different arrangement, but still very tied to the plantation through the sharecropping system and the company's store and so forth.
Yeah. Let me see. I have a bunch of, these are all photos from the Whitney plantation. Let's see, there's a photo at the slave quarter.
And just so that people understand what Whitney is attempting to do, it's the first plantation in America that attempted to tell the story of what happened to the enslaved people who were there, to see it as a slave labor camp, and also to connect the system of enslavement and slavery and plantation agriculture to the generation of wealth in the American economy, especially in the early 19th century, both South and North. So it wasn't just plantation owners that were getting wealthy from the system, but it was Northern industrialists, factory owners, financiers, and others who were also benefiting from the system. So it was very central to the American economy in ways that we often don't understand, in addition to being individually brutal and horrific. And Whitney exists just to tell that story. There's since been another plantation, I think in South Carolina, that's attempting to do the same thing. But most former plantations in the American South have long been like those that continue to exist, or wedding venues or B&Bs and places like that. And this one does not devote any resources into restoring the big house. It tells you the story of what actually this whole system was about, and how brutal it was in its granularity.
And Christopher will put in the chat a link to Telos's website. So if you are interested in taking one of these trips, please reach out to them. They're in a fantastic organization to do this with. Christopher, someone said that you need to enable copy in the chat so people can actually copy all of the links that you put in there.
I will attempt to do that. If not, I can make sure that all the links are sent in the follow-up email to everybody registered. So.
Okay. We are going to catch our flight, but thank you everyone for joining us here today on International Peace Day. Thank you to our partners at the Selma Center for Nonviolence and at Telos. Robbie, Yuval, and Lila, may you have safe travels back to Palestine and Israel. And thank you as always to Christopher.
Happy International Peace.
Thank you all.
Can I-
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Wow.